On his way home in a fierce blizzard, biker Jack Miller finds a stray dog shivering under a bridge. He rescues the freezing animal, names it Max, and it becomes the only source of warmth in his lonely life. Jack and Max hear a crash and discover an overturned car with a pregnant woman inside. She whispers, "Please, save my baby." Jack carries her to an abandoned cabin, struggling to keep her alive, until Max senses the roof is about to collapse. Jack carries her on his back and rides into the deadly storm, following Max toward a dim light, a ranger station, their only hope. And what happens next will turn that deadly winter night into a miracle the town will remember forever. Winter in northern Ohio had a way of making everything look harsher than it already was. The highways were lined with slush, the air burned against the skin, and the sky stayed gray for days at a time. Snow blew across the empty fields, covering old fences and broken signs. Even the streetlights seemed dimmer in the storm, their yellow glow swallowed by the wind. Jack Miller rode his Harley along the icy road, leaning forward against the cold. The motorcycle's engine rumbled deeply beneath him, cutting through the silence of the night. Jack was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, with a lean, hardened look. His black leather jacket was scratched from years of riding, his gloves were worn, and his boots were covered in salt from the winter roads. A dark beard covered his jaw, sprinkled with early gray. His face looked tired, not just from the long shift at the machine shop, but from the weight of years. Jack was a former soldier, a man who had seen both the worst and the best of people. A small scar ran above his right eyebrow, and another crossed the side of his chin, reminders of things he didn't talk about. His right knee ached when the temperature dropped, stiff and stubborn from an old injury. He guided the Harley carefully. The roads were dangerous tonight. Black ice formed in unpredictable patches, and every turn had to be taken with caution. He had worked overtime again. Too many bills, too few hours. Riding home in a storm like this wasn't ideal, but he didn't have a choice. Work was work, and winter didn't care about anyone's comfort. As he crossed a small bridge on the edge of town, something unusual happened. The Harley's engine drowned out most sounds, but Jack suddenly felt a strange tug inside him, the kind that made soldiers stop and turn, even when they didn't know why. He slowed down, listening. The wind howled through the bridge rails, carrying the sound of the river below. Then he heard it, a faint cry, not human, not the wind, a soft, weak, broken sound. Jack frowned, pulled the Harley to the side, and cut the engine. The sudden silence made the night feel even colder. Snowflakes hit his visor, melting into cold droplets. He lifted the visor and listened again. There it was, a thin whine, painful, desperate. Jack swung off the bike, boots crunching on the icy pavement. He walked toward the railing and looked down the side of the bridge. His breath formed a cloud in the air as he exhaled. Something moved near the concrete base below. He took a few steps back into the end of the bridge where a narrow maintenance slope descended toward the river's edge. It was covered in snow, steep and slick. Jack grunted. "Great," he muttered. "Just what I needed." But he didn't walk away. He never had been the kind of man who ignored someone, or something, in trouble. Jack grabbed the guardrail, steadied himself, and carefully made his way down the icy hill. His boots slipped twice and his knee complained with every step, but he kept going. The cold bit into his cheeks as the wind blew harder near the river. When he reached the bottom, he saw it clearly. A dog. Medium-sized, thin, with dirty fur matted by snow and mud. The dog lay curled against the cement wall, shivering violently. Its ribs showed through its coat, its ears were lowered, and its amber eyes flickered open when Jack approached, eyes full of fear and exhaustion. Jack crouched slowly, ignoring the stab of pain in his knee. "Easy there," he said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dog let out a weak whine. It tried to stand but slipped, too weak to lift its own weight. Jack sighed. He didn't need another responsibility. He already struggled to pay his rent, take care of his bike, and stay warm in the winter. A dog would be expensive. It would take time, care, food he barely had for himself. But then the dog looked at him, not with anger, not with wild fear, but with a kind of quiet pleading. Jack cursed under his breath, rubbed his face with a gloved hand, and reached into his leather jacket. He pulled out the sandwich he had planned to eat when he got home, peanut butter on cheap white bread, and tore off a piece. He placed it on the snow. The dog sniffed the air, crawled forward weakly, and ate it in 2 small bites. Jack gave it the rest of the sandwich. The dog ate quickly, licking the snow afterward as if hoping for more. "You're freezing," Jack said. "You won't last the night out here." He looked back up the icy slope and sighed again. Then he leaned forward and carefully slid his arms under the thin animal. The dog didn't fight him. In fact, it seemed relieved, resting its head weakly against his chest. "All right," Jack murmured. "Let's get you out of this weather." Carrying the dog wasn't easy. His knee protested with every step, but he managed to climb back to the road. He reached the Harley and gently placed the dog inside his open jacket for warmth. The dog trembled, but he stayed still, trusting him. Jack fastened his jacket around them both, climbed onto the bike, and started the engine. The Harley roared to life. "This is insane," Jack muttered, "but you're coming home with me, just until you're warm." The dog let out a soft, tired whine that almost sounded like gratitude. Jack rode slowly through the snowy streets, protecting the fragile animal with his body. When he finally reached his apartment building, he carried the dog upstairs, his arms aching but steady. Inside the small apartment, Jack placed the dog on an old blanket near the heater. The dog curled into a tight ball, still shaking, but already breathing a little easier. Jack filled a bowl with water and set it beside the blanket. The dog drank eagerly. "You need a name, buddy," Jack said quietly. The dog lifted its head, looking at him with soft amber eyes. "Max," Jack said after a moment. "Yeah, Max suits you." The dog's tail moved weakly, the first sign of happiness. Jack sat on his bed, watching the dog settle in. The room felt warmer than usual, not because of the heater, but because, for the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel completely alone. The storm grew stronger as night fell. Snow covered the entire road in a thick white layer, and the wind blew so hard it made it difficult to see more than a few meters ahead. Jack Miller stepped outside his small apartment building, pulling his old coat tight around his chest. The cold air hit his face immediately, sharp enough to make his eyes water. Winter storms were normal in this part of Ohio, but tonight's weather felt unusually harsh. Beside him, Max trotted forward through the snow. The dog stayed close, lifting his paws quickly each time they touched the frozen ground. His fur, still thin from living on the streets, barely protected him from the biting wind. Jack had not planned to go far, only to check the main road in case he could help anyone stranded by the storm. His military habits made him uneasy staying indoors when the weather became dangerous. He always felt a need to make sure the people around him were safe, even strangers. The wind howled through the empty street. Snowflakes slapped against Jack's coat as he walked. The town was quiet. No cars, no open stores, no people outside. Then a sound cut through the wind. A sudden metallic crash, faint but sharp, echoed from the direction of the hillside road. Jack stopped immediately. Max stopped too, ears raised, body tense. Jack listened. Another noise followed, something like the sound of metal scraping against ice. He didn't hesitate. "Come on, Max." "Gina, Max," he said, starting to move quickly toward the sound. Max ran ahead, leaving small paw prints behind him. Jack followed the dog's tracks, climbing the slight hill that curved along the road, leading out of town. The wind grew stronger the higher they climbed. Jack bent forward, shielding his face with his arm. Snow blew hard across the pavement, making it difficult to walk straight. After several minutes, Jack finally saw something through the swirling snow, a dark shape lying on its side near the guardrail. As he got closer, the shape became clear. It was a car overturned, half buried in snow. Jack's chest tightened. He started running. When he reached the vehicle, he brushed snow away from the driver's side window with his sleeve. The glass was cracked, but he could still see inside. A woman was in the driver's seat. Her head leaned against the window, and her dark hair fell partly over her face. She looked young, maybe in her early 30s. Her skin was pale, lips slightly blue. Her body trembled uncontrollably. Jack knocked on the window. "Can you hear me?" The woman's eyes fluttered open. She tried to speak, but only a faint sound came out. Jack looked down and saw her left leg pinned awkwardly between the dashboard and seat. She was stuck. And then he noticed something else. Her hands were holding her stomach. She was pregnant, very pregnant, around 7 months, he guessed. He heard her whisper something. Jack leaned closer. "Please." Her voice shook badly. "Please save my baby. I have no one." The desperation in her voice made Jack act instantly. The door was almost frozen shut, but he pulled hard, using his shoulder to push against it. After several tries, the door finally opened just enough for him to squeeze inside. The cold air from outside rushed in, making the woman shiver even more. "You're going to be okay," Jack said firmly. "I'm getting you out of here." She shook her head weakly. "My leg! I can't move." Jack inspected the dashboard. The metal was bent but not impossible to work around. He pushed against the damaged panel, using his strength to create just enough space for her to pull her leg free. She cried out from the pain, but Jack encouraged her gently. "Just a little more. You're doing great." Finally, her leg came loose. Jack quickly unbuckled her seatbelt. He knew she couldn't walk. He would have to carry her. Without hesitation, he removed his only coat, the one thing keeping him warm, and wrapped it around her. The cold air stabbed at his skin immediately, but he didn't care. "You need this more than I do," he said. Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you," Max barked sharply, standing at the open door. When Jack lifted the woman into his arms, Max immediately moved closer, as if ready to guide them. The woman was shaking violently. Jack could feel how cold her body was. Her breathing was shallow and uneven, signs of dangerous hypothermia. "We need to keep her warm," Jack said to himself. Max stepped forward and pressed his body gently against the woman's stomach, curling close to her side as Jack held her. His warm body heat helped shield the baby from the freezing air. "That's it, Max. Good boy," Jack said softly. Wind pushed snow directly into Jack's face as he began walking back down the hill. Each step was difficult. The storm made the road slippery, and the weight of carrying the woman strained his injured knee. But he kept moving, tightening his grip around her every time she trembled. She rested her head against his shoulder. "My name, Elena," she whispered. "I'm Jack," he replied. "We're getting you to safety, Elena. Hold on to me." Her breathing hitched, and for a moment Jack thought she might faint. Max stayed right beside them the entire time, glancing up often to check on the woman. Occasionally he pressed his head gently against her side, sharing warmth. After several long minutes, the lights of Jack's apartment building came into view through the storm. "We're almost there," Jack said, though he wasn't sure she heard him. He climbed the stairs slowly, breathing heavily. His knee felt like it might give out, but he pushed through the pain. Max stayed close behind them, paws tapping the steps. Inside the apartment, the warmth, or what little there was, felt like a blessing. Jack lowered Elena gently onto his bed, keeping the coat wrapped around her. Her face was pale, and her teeth chattered, uncontrollably. Max climbed onto the bed without being told and curled tightly against her stomach again, offering warmth. Jack covered her with all the blankets he owned, then knelt beside the bed. "You're safe now," he said. "We'll get you through this." Elena looked at him with tears forming in her eyes. Please don't let anything happen to my baby." Jack shook his head firmly. "I won't. I promise." Max looked up at Jack, as if sharing that same promise. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside that small, cold apartment, 3 people, 1 man, 1 woman, and 1 dog, held on to each other in the only warmth they had. The storm grew worse as Jack carried Elena away from the overturned car. Snow fell so heavily that the road behind them disappeared within minutes. The wind blew against Jack's back, pushing him sideways. He tightened his hold on Elena, afraid that one slip could send both of them onto the ice. Max stayed close, trotting ahead for a few steps, then circling back to make sure Jack was still behind him. The dog barked occasionally, but the sound was nearly lost in the roar of the storm. Jack's apartment was too far, and the woman in his arms was shaking harder every minute. She was losing strength quickly. Her lips were pale, and she kept her hands tightly around her stomach, trying to protect the baby. Jack looked around desperately for any kind of shelter. That was when he saw it, barely visible through the snow. A dark shape stood a short distance off the road, behind a row of leafless trees. It looked old, small, and worn, but it was a structure, a cabin. "Hang on, Elena," Jack said, shifting his weight and moving toward it. "I'm taking you somewhere safe." Elena's eyes opened slightly. She tried to speak, but only a weak sound came out. Max ran ahead, stopping in front of the cabin door and barking, as if urging Jack to hurry. Jack reached the door and pushed it open. It creaked loudly, and a rush of cold air met them inside. The cabin was clearly abandoned. The windows were cracked, the floor covered in dust and old leaves, and the fireplace was filled with bits of broken wood. But it was shelter, and at that moment, it was the best chance they had. Jack carried Elena inside and gently laid her on the floor near the fireplace. Max immediately curled himself beside her, his body pressing against her stomach to provide warmth. Jack knelt beside her. "I'll get a fire going. You're going to be all right." Elena nodded faintly, but her face showed fear and exhaustion. Her breathing was shallow, and her hands shook uncontrollably from the cold. Jack moved quickly, gathering anything that could burn: broken chair legs, old branches from the corner, even pieces of cardboard left behind by whoever had used the cabin long ago. His hands were numb from the cold, making every movement slower, but he forced himself to keep working. He arranged the wood inside the fireplace, then pulled a small lighter from his coat pocket. It was almost out of fuel, but after several tries, a flame finally caught onto the driest pieces. The fire grew slowly, giving off a weak but steady warmth. The small room lit up with a soft orange glow. Jack sat back on his heels, watching the flames rise. It wasn't much, but it was enough to raise the temperature slightly. He checked on Elena again. Her face looked a bit less pale in the firelight. Max remained pressed against her side, refusing to move even an inch. The dog's body shook from the cold, but he kept himself close to her, understanding in his own way that she needed warmth. Jack removed the blanket from his backpack and placed it over Elena. He wished he had more, but it was all he had brought. He rubbed his hands together and blew on them, trying to warm them enough to help her. "Elena," he said softly, "do you feel any warmer?" She blinked slowly and whispered, "A little, thank you." Her voice was weak but clearer than before. Jack glanced at the window. Snow smacked against the glass, making a loud tapping sound. The wind outside didn't slow for even a second. It was obvious that no rescue team could reach them tonight. The roads were completely blocked, and visibility was near zero. "We're stuck here for a while," Jack said, "but I'll stay awake and keep the fire going. You just rest. You and the baby are safe now." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she closed them, exhausted. Jack sat down beside the fireplace, stretching his sore knee. The pain pulsed with every heartbeat, but he ignored it. His attention was fixed on Elena and Max. Max stayed the closest to her, his nose tucked gently against her belly. Every so often he would lift his head, look at Jack, then nuzzle Elena again, as if checking that she was still breathing. "You're doing good, boy," Jack whispered. "Keep her warm." The dog wagged his tail once, but didn't move away from her. Hours passed slowly. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with the only warmth they had. Jack added more wood whenever the flames began to fade. The storm howled outside, shaking the old cabin walls. Occasionally, snow slipped off the roof, landing with a heavy thud that made Jack glance up in concern. But for the moment, the cabin held strong. Elena woke briefly several times. Each time, Jack checked her temperature, her breathing, and asked if she felt pain. She always answered the same way. Her leg hurt, her body felt numb, and she was scared. But she remained conscious because the fire and Max's warmth kept her from slipping too far into hypothermia. Jack tried to keep her talking, but after a while, she could no longer stay awake. Her breaths became slow and steady, and she slept with one hand resting gently on Max's fur. Jack watched over her in silence. The hours felt long, and the wind outside never stopped. But inside the cabin, something felt steady and safe. It was not comfortable, but it was enough. Enough to keep Elena and her unborn child alive through the night. When dawn finally approached, the storm still showed no signs of stopping. Snow continued to fall heavily, and the cold remained sharp. But the fire was still alive. Max was still curled beside Elena, and Jack was still awake, watching over both of them. He looked at the woman and the dog, and felt a sense of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. They were depending on him now, and Jack Miller had never abandoned anyone under his care. Not in the military, not now, not ever. The storm continued into the early morning, heavy enough that the windows of the cabin were frosted over from the inside. The weak fire in the fireplace cast a faint glow across the wooden floor, but the rest of the cabin remained cold and dim. The wind outside howled, pushing bursts of snow against the thin walls. Jack sat near the fire, feeding small pieces of broken wood into the flames. His hands were stiff, and his knee ached from the long night, but he ignored the discomfort. Elena was the priority. Elena lay wrapped in blankets a few feet away. Max was curled tightly against her stomach, still helping keep her warm. Every so often, Elena shivered, and Max pressed himself even closer. Jack leaned over and checked her forehead with the back of his hand. "Still cold," he murmured softly, "but at least you're stable." Elena's eyes slowly opened. For a moment she looked confused, as if trying to remember where she was. Then she focused on Jack and exhaled shakily. "The storm," she whispered. "It's still going," Jack said. "Rescue can't reach this area until it clears." Elena swallowed hard and nodded. She looked weak, her skin pale, her breathing uneven, but she was conscious, and Jack took that as a good sign. Max lifted his head and nuzzled her arm gently. Elena smiled faintly and stroked his fur with trembling fingers. "He's so warm," she whispered. "He saved my baby last night." Jack nodded. "He did. He stayed with you the whole time." Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant roar of the wind. Elena closed her eyes again, but this time not from exhaustion. She looked like she was gathering courage. After several long seconds, she whispered, "Jack, can I tell you something?" Jack shifted closer to her. "Of course." Her head turned slightly toward him. Her eyes were glossy, filled with a mixture of pain and fear. "No one knows what really happened to me," she said quietly. "No one knows why I was alone on that road." Jack didn't interrupt. He could tell she needed time to speak. "I was married," she began. "His name was Andrew. At first he was charming, kind, gentle. Then he changed." Her voice trembled. Max nudged her again, and she rested her hand on his head for comfort. "When I told him I was pregnant," she continued, "he got angry. He said a child would ruin his plans. He told me I was trapping him, that I was doing it on purpose." Jack's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. "One night he packed his bags and told me he didn't want anything to do with me or the baby." Tears slid down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. "He left, just like that." She sucked in a shaky breath before continuing. "When I called my parents, they said I made my choice when I married him. They said I had to solve my own problems." She let out a quiet sob. "My own family turned their backs on me." Jack felt anger building in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm sorry that happened to you." Elena shook her head weakly. "I had nowhere to go. No money, no support. I thought if I could just reach my cousin in the next town, I could start over, find safety for my baby." Her voice cracked. "But then the storm hit. The road was icy. I lost control of the car. When it flipped—" She paused, trying to steady her breathing. "I thought it was the end. I really did." Her eyes filled again, this time with raw fear. "When you found me, I thought maybe God was giving me one more chance." Jack placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're safe now. I'm here. Max is here." Elena closed her eyes tightly. More tears escaped. "Jack?" "Yes?" "If something happens to me," her voice dropped to almost a whisper, "please save my baby, even if I don't make it." Jack froze for a second, then he shook his head firmly. "No," he said. "Don't talk like that." Elena looked at him with desperate eyes. "Please, promise me." Jack moved closer, carefully placing both hands on her arms so she could feel his warmth. "Listen to me," he said, steady and calm. "You're going to make it. I won't let anything happen to you or the baby, not while I'm still breathing." Elena stared at him, tears streaming freely now. She looked exhausted, but a hint of relief passed across her face at his words. "But if things get worse—" "They won't," Jack interrupted gently. "I'll carry you through the storm again if I have to. I'll walk miles. I'll fight through the cold. I'll do whatever it takes." Max barked softly, as if agreeing. Jack gave the dog a small smile. "See? Even Max refuses to let you go." Elena let out a quiet, broken laugh, the first sound resembling joy since he found her. "You too," she whispered. "I don't even know you, and yet, you're the only people who have cared about me in so long." Jack didn't have to think about his reply. "You're not alone anymore. Not tonight. Not while I'm here." The fire crackled beside them, giving the room a faint, warm glow. Elena's breathing slowed slightly as she relaxed, though her face still reflected deep worry. She spoke again, her voice soft but determined. "If I survive this, I'm going to protect my child. I won't let anyone hurt her, not like what happened to me." Jack nodded. "And you won't have to do it alone. We'll get you to safety." Outside, the wind slammed hard against the walls, causing the old wooden cabin to shake. The storm was unforgiving, and Jack knew they couldn't stay here forever. But for now, Elena needed rest, warmth, and reassurance. She slowly drifted into sleep again, her hand resting over her stomach. Max shifted slightly and curled even closer, his warm body pressed against her side. Jack watched them both for a long time. The firelight flickered across their faces, painting a fragile picture of safety inside a world of snow and danger. He whispered quietly, almost like a promise, "You're not dying here, Elena. Not today. Not on my watch." The storm raged on, but inside the cabin, a small circle of hope had formed, held together by one injured man, one frightened mother-to-be, and one loyal dog who refused to leave her side. The morning passed slowly inside the abandoned cabin. The fire burned weakly, and Jack added wood whenever the flames began to shrink. Elena slept on and off, her breathing unsteady but calmer than the night before. Max never left her side. Every time she shivered, Max pressed closer, sharing every bit of warmth his small body could give. Outside, the storm was still violent. Snow blew sideways across the trees, and the distant howl of the wind warned that the worst might not be over yet. Jack kept checking the windows, hoping to see signs of rescue or clearer weather, but all he saw was endless white, thick and blinding. He returned to Elena's side. She opened her eyes slowly, exhaustion written across her face. "How long until someone can come?" she whispered. Jack shook his head. "Roads are blocked. Until the storm softens, rescue teams won't reach this area." Elena swallowed hard. Then, "We might still be alone for hours." Jack nodded gently. "But we'll make it through." Before he could say more, Max suddenly lifted his head. His ears stood straight, his body stiffened. He stared upward toward the cabin roof. Jack noticed the change immediately. "What is it, Max?" Max whimpered softly, then barked once, sharp and urgent. Jack stood. He listened carefully. At first, he heard only the wind. Then something else. A low creaking sound, faint but growing louder. It came from above their heads. Jack's eyes widened. He stepped to the center of the room and looked up. The cabin roof sagged under a huge weight of snow. As the storm worsened overnight, the heavy layers of ice and packed snow had slowly pushed down on the old, weakened wooden beams. Now they were bending. Creak, crack. A thin line formed along one of the beams, letting a few pieces of snow fall through. "Damn," Jack whispered. Elena's eyes widened. "What's happening?" "The roof," Jack said, his voice tense. "It's too heavy. It's about to collapse." Max barked again, louder this time, stepping toward the door and then back toward Jack, warning them desperately. Jack took a deep breath, fighting the panic rising in his chest. "Okay," he said firmly. "We can't stay here. We have to move. Now." Elena struggled to push herself up, but her leg injury and weakness made it impossible. I can't walk." "I know." Jack knelt beside her. "I'll carry you." The roof groaned again, long, low, and threatening. Jack worked fast. He wrapped Elena tightly in the blankets to protect her from the cold. Then he helped her sit upright before sliding her carefully onto his back. She wrapped her arms weakly around his shoulders, holding on as best she could. Her voice trembled. "Jack, are you sure you can—" "Yes," he said before she could finish. "I'm sure." He stood slowly, adjusting her weight. His injured knee protested immediately, sending a sharp jolt of pain up his leg, but he gritted his teeth and kept going. Max ran to the door, barking and scratching at it. "He wants us to hurry," Jack said. Another crack came from above, louder this time. Snow began to spill through a widening gap in the roof. Jack's heart pounded. "We're leaving, now!" Max pushed at the door again, so Jack kicked it open with his boot. The moment the door swung outward, a blast of icy wind hit them. Snow swirled violently outside, almost blinding. Jack tightened his grip on Elena. "Keep your head down," he said. Max ran out first. Jack followed, stepping into the violent blizzard. Snow immediately clung to his eyelashes and beard. His vision shrank to only a few feet in front of him. Behind them, the cabin made a loud, cracking noise. Jack didn't look back. He didn't need to. A second later, whump! The roof collapsed, sending snow and debris into the space they had just left. Elena gasped softly against his shoulder. Jack held her tighter. "We're okay," he said, breathing heavily. "We got out." But the real challenge had just begun. They were now outside in the middle of a brutal storm, far from town, far from help. Snow buried Jack's boots with each step, and the cold stabbed into his exposed skin like knives. Max stayed ahead of them, pausing every few seconds to make sure Jack was still following. The dog barked through the storm, as if trying to guide them. "Elena," Jack said, raising his voice to be heard over the wind, "I'm going to follow Max. Dogs can sense shelter better than humans in weather like this." Elena nodded weakly against his back. "Okay, okay." Jack leaned forward and kept walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. The snow dragged against his legs. The ice beneath made him slip constantly. His knee felt like it was being torn apart, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Max suddenly barked twice, this time in a different tone, urgent but hopeful. Jack narrowed his eyes, squinting through the snow. Then he saw it, a faint, distant glow, small but unmistakable, shining through the blizzard. A light. "Elena!" Jack shouted. "There's something ahead. A light!" She let out a breath that sounded almost like a sob. "Please, please get us there." Max barked and ran ahead, turning back every few seconds to make sure Jack followed the same direction. Jack struggled forward, his breath freezing in the air. The cold felt sharper with each passing minute, and his body shook from exhaustion. Elena's weight made every step harder, but he held on. "We're almost there," he said between breaths, though he wasn't sure if Elena could hear him anymore. Her head rested limply against his shoulder. She wasn't unconscious, but she was close. "Stay with me," Jack said, voice firm. "We're going to make it." Max kept running ahead and then circling back, guiding them in a straight path toward the light. Jack moved step by step, refusing to let himself fall. The wind roared around them, but the light grew brighter. Finally, after what felt like hours, Jack saw the shape behind the glow. A ranger station, a real building, a real shelter, a place where someone might hear them. Jack almost fell to his knees from relief. "We made it," he whispered. Max barked loudly, as if celebrating, but the storm swallowed nearly all sound, and the door to the station remained closed. No one inside could hear them. Jack staggered toward the entrance, pushing through the final few feet of deep snow. "Elena," Jack said softly, voice trembling with exhaustion, "we're here. Just hold on a little longer." But as he lifted his hand to knock, Elena didn't answer, and Jack realized they still weren't safe. Not yet. The ranger station was only a short distance ahead, but the blizzard made it feel impossibly far. The air was so cold that Jack's eyelashes froze together each time he blinked. His breath came out in sharp bursts of steam. Elena lay limp against his back, her arms weakly hooked around his shoulders. She was conscious only in small moments, drifting in and out as the wind roared around them. Max stayed close at Jack's side, sometimes running ahead but always circling back. His tracks disappeared instantly under fresh snow, but Jack kept his eyes on the dog's dark shape to avoid losing his direction. "We're almost safe," Jack said, though the words sounded shaky even to himself. The snow thickened again, turning the world into a white curtain. Jack could barely see his own boots. His injured knee trembled beneath Elena's weight, but he refused to stop. Every time he hesitated, he reminded himself of Elena's plea into the cabin. "Save my baby, even if I don't make it." He wasn't going to let that happen. The wind screamed across the trees, whipping snow against his face hard enough to sting. Elena stirred weakly. "Jack?" Her voice was faint, strained. "Is the baby okay?" Jack adjusted his grip. "You're both okay. Stay awake if you can." She sighed, her head dropping against his shoulder again. Trying. He could feel how cold she was even through the blankets. Her breath was uneven, her strength fading. "We're going to make it," he whispered. But deep inside, Jack knew they still had one dangerous obstacle to cross. A narrow old wooden bridge stretched over a rocky gorge between the forest path and the ranger station. In the summer, hikers crossed it without thinking, but now the bridge was covered in ice, nearly invisible under the snow. Max reached the start of the bridge first. He barked, hesitant, looking back at Jack as if warning him. Jack stopped. He stared at the bridge, barely visible through the storm. The wood planks were frozen and slick. The railing on one side was broken. A fall here would mean a deadly drop onto jagged rocks below. He took a slow breath. "Okay, we take this step by step." Elena didn't answer. She was barely conscious now. Jack stepped onto the bridge. The first plank creaked under his weight. A thin layer of ice cracked beneath his boot. He tightened his grip on Elena and shifted his balance slowly, distributing weight carefully like he had learned during military training. Max walked onto the bridge first, paws light and precise. He looked back every few seconds, waiting for Jack. Jack took another step, then another. The wind pushed hard against them, making Elena's blankets flap violently. Jack had to plant his feet firmly to avoid sliding sideways. "Just a little more," he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was reassuring. Elena, Max, or himself. Halfway across, the storm grew even more violent. Snow blasted across the bridge, making it impossible to see more than a few inches ahead. Jack kept his eyes low, watching his boots and the weak outline of the planks beneath them. Then it happened. His foot slid. The ice under his boot shattered, and his leg slipped sideways. Jack lost his balance. Elena's weight pulled him even further off center. The world tilted. Jack felt himself falling toward the edge of the bridge. He instinctively twisted his body to shield Elena. His fingers scraped against the icy wood, trying to grab something, anything, but he couldn't. His body slid. The broken railing loomed to his right. Below it was the dark, frozen gorge. Elena let out a weak cry. "Jack!" Jack's heart slammed in his chest. His vision blurred with panic. He reached out blindly. And then he felt something clamp onto his sleeve. A sharp tug. A sudden stop. Jack gasped and looked down. Max had his teeth locked firmly onto Jack's jacket sleeve, his small body leaning backward with all his strength, paws skidding but holding their ground. The dog growled, pulling, refusing to let Jack fall. "Max," Jack breathed, "don't let go." Max pulled harder, digging his paws into the ice. Jack used the moment to slam his free hand against the bridge rail. His gloves froze instantly to the wood, but he didn't care. He caught a plank and used it to haul himself upright again. Elena whimpered, still clinging weakly to his shoulders. Jack finally regained balance. Max released the sleeve but stayed pressed against Jack's leg, watching him closely. Jack crouched for a moment, catching his breath. "Good boy, good boy." His hands shook from adrenaline. "You saved us." Max barked once, as if telling Jack to keep moving. Jack stood again carefully. His whole body felt heavy, trembling from fear and exhaustion. But he took another step, then another. The three of them moved slowly across the remaining planks until Jack finally stepped onto solid ground on the other side. He nearly collapsed from relief. The ranger station was only 50 meters ahead, its faint yellow porch light glowing through the storm. "Elena," Jack whispered, "we're close. We're so close." She didn't answer. Her head rested motionless against his shoulder. Jack didn't waste another second. He pushed through the deep snow, Max leading the way, barking louder now, almost encouraging them to keep going. Jack reached the station steps, stumbling as he climbed them. His muscles felt like they were burning, his lungs tight from the cold. He pounded on the door with his fist. "Help! Please! Someone!" But the wind swallowed most of his voice. He shouted again, louder, but no movement came from inside. Elena's breathing was barely audible now. Jack's throat tightened. "No, not now. Not after everything," Max barked frantically, running back and forth between Jack and the snow-covered trail. Then suddenly, Max bolted into the storm. "Max!" Jack called, but the dog disappeared into the white. Jack's heart pounded. He didn't know where Max was going, but he knew the dog never ran without a reason. Jack pressed Elena closer. "Hold on. Max is getting help. He has to." The storm roared around them, but for the first time that night, Jack felt the smallest spark of hope. Max had saved them once on the bridge. Maybe he could save them again. Jack stood on the wooden porch of the ranger station, leaning against the wall to keep from falling. Snow blew across his face in hard, icy waves. His arms tightened around Elena, who lay limp against him. Her breathing was faint, shallow, and unsteady. Inside the cabin, the lights were on, but the storm was so loud that none of Jack's pounding or shouting reached the ears of anyone inside. The wind swallowed every sound the moment it left his mouth. "Please," Jack whispered, voice cracking. "Someone, open the door!" But no one came. Max had already disappeared into the storm, his small, dark shape swallowed up by white. Jack stared into the blizzard, heart pounding, unsure if he would ever see the dog again. "Come on, Max," he murmured. "You can do this." Elena's fingers twitched weakly against his chest. Jack looked down quickly. "Elena, stay with me." Her eyelids fluttered. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Cold, Jack. So cold." "I know," he said, holding her tighter. "Help is coming. Max is bringing help." But inside, Jack feared the truth. Without medical care soon, Elena and the baby might not survive much longer. Her skin was cold. Too cold. Her breathing was slowing. The exhaustion in her face was unmistakable. He lowered himself to his knees, shielding her from the wind as best he could. Snow piled around them, threatening to bury them if they stayed too long. The seconds stretched painfully. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes. Max still hadn't returned. Jack's heartbeat grew heavier. His hands began to shake, not from the cold, but from fear. "Come on, boy, please." Another minute passed. Then, through the roar of the blizzard, Jack heard something faint, a bark. His head lifted instantly. Another bark, louder this time. Jack rose onto unsteady feet, turning toward the trail. And then he saw him, Max, running through the storm, his paws kicking up snow behind him. But he wasn't alone. Two figures appeared behind him, two men in bright orange ranger jackets, pushing through the storm with heavy packs and emergency gear strapped to their sides. Jack felt relief so strong it nearly made his legs collapse. Max reached Jack first, leaping forward and pressing his cold nose into Jack's leg, whining anxiously. "You did it," Jack whispered, dropping to one knee to hold the dog. "You really did it." One of the rescuers hurried up the steps. He was tall, with ice forming on his beard and goggles covering his eyes. He knelt beside Jack and Elena. "I'm Ranger Collins," the man said loudly. "We got the dog's attention. He led us straight here." The second ranger, a younger man named Hartley, rushed forward with a medical kit. "How long has she been exposed?" he asked quickly. "Hours," Jack said. "She's pregnant, 7 months. She has injuries from a car crash." Ranger Collins nodded. "Okay, let's move fast." They immediately began assessing Elena's condition. Hartley checked her pulse, which was weak but present. Collins placed warming packs under the blankets and gently lifted her eyelids. "She's hypothermic but still responsive," he said. "We need to get her to a hospital now." Collins looked at Jack's shaking hands. "Are you injured?" Jack shook his head. "Just exhausted." Max sat glued to Jack's side, watching every movement with worried eyes. Hartley pulled a stretcher from his pack. "Let's load her." Jack hesitated for a moment, afraid to let go of her, but Collins placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "She's safe now. We'll take it from here." With practiced movements, the Rangers placed Elena onto the stretcher, securing her with straps and wrapping her tightly in thermal blankets. "We radioed the station before leaving," Collins said. "An emergency SUV is waiting at the road. It has chains and plows. It can get through the snow." Jack nodded, wiping melting snow from his face. The Rangers lifted the stretcher together. Jack forced himself to stand despite his trembling legs. "I'm coming with you," he said. "Of course," Collins replied. "Follow close and don't fall behind." They pushed into the blizzard as a group, 2 Rangers carrying Elena, Jack walking behind them, Max staying glued to Jack's side like a shadow. The walk back felt shorter, maybe because Jack finally had hope. Snow still lashed against them, but he barely noticed it now. His eyes were fixed on Elena's face, watching for any sign of change. After 10 minutes, they reached the emergency SUV. Its headlights cut through the storm like 2 bright spears. Hartley opened the back door. "Load her in." Jack climbed into the back seat beside Elena. Max jumped in after him, curling up at Jack's feet. Collins closed the door and climbed into the driver's seat. "Hospital is 25 minutes with chains. Hold tight." The vehicle began moving, plowing through deep snow. Jack held Elena's hand the entire time. Max rested his chin on Jack's knee. "Hang on, Elena," Jack whispered. "Just a little longer." Her fingers twitched weakly in response. 25 minutes later, the SUV slid into the emergency lane in front of the nearest hospital. Doctors and nurses rushed out to meet them. "She's hypothermic and pregnant," Collins said quickly. "Leg injury from a crash, vital signs weak." The medical team placed Elena on another stretcher and wheeled her inside. Jack stepped off the vehicle, but his legs nearly buckled. Collins caught his arm. "You did everything you could," the ranger said. "She's in good hands now." Jack nodded, breathless. "Thank you. Thank you for coming." "Thank your dog," Hartley said with a smile. "If he hadn't reached us, we never would have known anyone was out there." Max barked once, as if proud. Jack reached down and stroked Max's head. "You saved her. Boy, you saved us all." Minutes later, a doctor approached Jack in the waiting room. "Are you the one who brought Elena?" "Yes," Jack said immediately. "She's stable," the doctor said. "We're preparing her for an emergency delivery. The baby's heart rate dipped dangerously low, but you got her here just in time." Jack let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. "Will the baby—" "Both mother and child have a very strong chance," the doctor said with a reassuring smile. "You saved 2 lives today." Jack sat down heavily, overwhelmed with relief. Max pressed his body against Jack's leg, offering quiet comfort. 20 minutes later, before Jack could fully gather his thoughts, the doctor returned. "Jack, he said warmly. She made it. And the baby, too. Jack closed his eyes, tears burning at the corners. You can see her soon, the doctor added. She's asking for you. Jack nodded, unable to speak. Max wagged his tail. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors. Soft morning light slipped through the blinds, warming the pale walls. Jack sat beside Elena's bed, exhaustion heavy in his eyes, but relief flooding his chest. Max lay curled at his feet, finally resting after the longest, coldest night of his life. After hours of waiting, a nurse opened the door gently. She's awake now, the woman said with a warm smile. You can come in. Jack stood slowly, every muscle sore, and walked into the adjoining recovery room. Elena lay propped up against white pillows. Her hair was messy, her skin still pale, but her eyes were brighter than he had ever seen them. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. Jack froze. The baby let out a tiny sound, soft and curious. Elena smiled tearfully. Jack, she whispered, meet my daughter. Jack stepped closer, hardly daring to breathe. Elena lowered the blanket slightly, revealing a tiny round face, small pink cheeks, and bright, blinking eyes. She's beautiful, Jack said softly, emotion tightening his voice. Elena nodded, brushing her thumb along the baby's cheek. I named her Hope. Jack swallowed, feeling warmth spread through him. That's perfect. Elena looked up at him with tears forming again, not from sadness, but from gratitude so deep she couldn't put it into words. If you hadn't found me, if you hadn't carried me through that storm. She shook her head, unable to continue. Jack sat beside her. You did the hard part. You held on long enough for help to reach you. Elena looked down at Hope again. Jack, I want to ask you something important. He waited. She lifted her eyes, steady but emotional. I want you to be her godfather. For a moment, Jack couldn't speak. His throat tightened. His eyes stung. Me? He finally whispered. You, she said firmly. There is no one else I trust more. You saved her life before she even took her first breath. I want her to grow up knowing the man who fought through a blizzard for her. Jack blinked away his tears. I'd be honored. Elena let out a relieved smile. Thank you. Max, hearing the gentle tone, got up and placed his front paws on Jack's leg. Elena reached out and petted the dog's head. And Max, igual en kiss, she added with a laugh. I guess you're her guardian angel. Max wagged his tail proudly, as if he understood every word. The storm had cleared. The sky was bright blue, and sunlight reflected off the thick white snow covering the town. The hospital held a small ceremony outside its entrance. Local reporters, a handful of townspeople, doctors, nurses, and rescue rangers gathered together. Jack stood with Elena, now able to walk slowly with assistance, and baby Hope resting in her arms. Max sat beside them, wearing a small scarf made by one of the nurses. Ranger Collins stepped forward with a silver medal attached to a blue ribbon. This, he announced, is the Winter Hero Dog Award, given to a dog whose actions saved human lives. Everyone clapped as Max wagged his tail so hard his whole body wiggled. Collins knelt down, scratching Max behind the ears. You're a real hero, buddy. Max barked proudly. When the medal was placed around Max's neck, the crowd cheered. Elena wiped away tears. Jack smiled wider than he had in years. Hope, cradled in her mother's arms, opened her eyes at the sound and gave a tiny happy squeak. Max responded with a gentle lick to her hand, making the baby giggle softly. A photographer snapped a picture of the four of them, Jack, Elena, Hope, and Max. None of them knew it then, but that photo would hang in the ranger station for years, a symbol of survival and kindness. Winter returned, but this time, the snow didn't feel threatening, it felt peaceful. Jack opened the door of the small cabin, the same cabin where everything had begun, but now it was fully repaired. New wooden beams, a reinforced roof, a working stove, and warm lights glowing through clean windows. Inside, Elena was cooking soup on the stove. Hope, now almost a year old, sat on a soft blanket, laughing as Max gently nudged a toy toward her. The dog's tail thumped against the floor rhythmically. Careful, Max, Elena said with a smile. She's trying to grab your ears again. Hope reached out with tiny hands. Max lowered his head patiently, letting her grab a bit of his fur before licking her cheek and making her giggle loudly. Jack stepped inside and removed his gloves. The warm air wrapped around him, comforting and familiar. "We've got enough wood for the whole week," he said. "Storm won't bother us at all." Elena turned toward him, her smile soft and full of meaning. "Good. I like storms now." Jack raised an eyebrow, teasing. "Do you?" Elena nodded and walked toward him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Because storms brought me here. To you, to Max, to a family." Hope babbled happily on the floor, waving her hands at Jack. He picked her up, letting her tiny fingers wrap around his. Max trotted over and leaned against Jack's leg. In that moment, the cabin felt full of warmth, full of love, full of life. Jack looked around the room. A year ago, this place had been a cold, collapsing shelter. Now it was home, and these people, Elena, Hope, and Max, were his family. He kissed Hope's forehead gently. "Ready for dinner, little one?" Hope squealed in approval. Elena placed bowls on the table. "Come on, hero," she said to Max. "You too." The dog barked once, proud and happy. Jack sat at the table with his new family. The blizzard outside was quiet, gentle, harmless, just snow falling peacefully across the forest. For the first time in years, Jack felt completely at peace. A soldier who had known loss, a woman who had faced abandonment, a baby who had fought her way into the world, and a stray dog who had saved them all. Together, they had found something stronger than fear, stronger than winter, stronger than loneliness. They had found a home, they had found each other, and as the snow continued to fall softly around their cabin, Jack whispered the words he had once never believed he would say again. "We're a family now." In the end, many said it was luck, but those who lived through the storm knew it was something more. Sometimes God sends us miracles in simple forms: a loyal dog, a kind stranger, a light in the snow when hope is fading. Jack, Elena, baby Hope, and Max remind us that no storm is too big when faith and love guide us. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs hope today. May God bless you and protect you through every storm.